I witnessed executions, not in a movie, but in reality, live on Iranian state television, which broadcast them with the same composure with which we might show a laundry detergent commercial. It was 2018, in Tehran. I was sitting in an apartment in the Elaye district, a nice area, quiet, bureaucratic, smelling of money and fear simultaneously, eating rice with chicken and looking at my phone. On the screen was a man, over 40, an intelligent face, glasses, the kind of typical professor you'd want to ask to explain a theorem. The verdict was read: espionage for a foreign state. Then the crane arm crawled upwards, and the man in glasses ceased to be the man in glasses. I finished my rice, because if you lose your appetite at that moment, you're in the wrong profession. And I was in the right one. Just keep working. My name is Eel. It's not my real name. My true identity is known by 3 people and a few servers in Tel Aviv. I worked as a Mossad agent in Iran for 7 years. For 7 years, I woke up Iranian, spoke Farsi without an accent, prayed in the right direction at the right time, worked in the Ministry of Defense of the Islamic Republic, and every night I fell asleep with the same thought: if something goes wrong tomorrow, the next television broadcast will be about me. That man in glasses on the screen, he fell asleep with that thought too. And for him, it went wrong. It didn't go wrong for me. Almost. But let's start from the beginning. How an Israeli kid from Netanya ended up as an official in the Iranian Ministry of Defense. Because it's not a case of signed up for spy courses, got a pistol, went. It's years of dirty, boring, methodical work to transform you into another person. And it doesn't start with romance. It starts with a windowless room and one question. I was 24. The army was behind me. Everyone serves in Israel. It's not heroism, it's just life, like traffic lights and supermarket queues. I served in an intelligence unit, worked with signal intelligence, and learned Farsi because it's a beautiful language, and Hafez is serious poetry, not what some might think. After the army, university, then a call. An unknown number, a male voice, calm as a surgeon before an operation. "Isle, got time for coffee?" I went to the meeting. An ordinary cafe in Tel Aviv, tourists, students, the smell of cardamom, a man in his 50s, balding, glasses, a plaid shirt, looking like an accountant whose wife sent him for milk. If I'd met him on the street, I wouldn't have looked twice. That, as I later understood, was the goal. He was so inconspicuous that he seemed deliberately so. He placed a sheet of paper in front of me. "Read it aloud." It was a technical text in Farsi, military logistics, specific slang, not textbook language. I read it. Fine. He put the sheet away. More coffee. And that was it. No fanfare, no speeches about the homeland, just coffee and one piece of paper. That's how an illegal agent's career begins. 18 months of preparation. It sounds like a professional development course. In reality, it's the methodical destruction of you as a person and the construction of another person in the same place. The legend, a biography from birth to today, every detail memorized like a multiplication table, every detail checked by people paid specifically to find holes. Family, Iranian immigrants who returned home, father deceased, mother in Mossad, relatives but distant. No close relatives were allowed. Close relatives are scrutinized more closely. And one living relative who doesn't know, you can end your career faster than any counterintelligence agent. I studied religion like preparing for an exam you absolutely cannot fail. One wrong gesture during prayer, one mixed up surah, one pause where there shouldn't be a pause, and you're no longer a devout Muslim who returned home. You're a question. And questions in Iranian counterintelligence are asked in their own way, not over a cup of tea. I refined my Farsi to the point where I thought in it. Not translated, truly thought. This is important because when you translate, the answer to a question comes a fraction of a second later. A trained person, and Iranian counterintelligence doesn't hire untrained idiots, notices that pause. They checked me in my sleep. A special person sat nearby while I slept after exertion, listening to what I mumbled. Seriously. Not paranoia. Professionalism. 2014, Tehran Airport. The border guard took my passport, looked at me, looked at the photo, back at me. Those 3 seconds. They stretched like chewing gum, like a bad dream, like a queue in a Soviet store. My heart pounded so hard I thought the border guard could hear it. A stamp. Welcome. I smiled politely, said thank you in flawless Farsi, and walked toward the exit. Outside, Tehran. Traffic jams, honking, smog, 95-degree heat, the smell of exhaust and spices. I stood on the sidewalk with one suitcase and thought, well, here we are, literally. The first 6 months were about legalization, an apartment, a job at a small engineering firm, the market on Fridays, conversations with neighbors. The landlord, a 70-year-old grumpy fat man with walrus mustaches, loved to complain about the government in a low voice, then immediately look around as if the government was hiding behind the wardrobe. A typical Tehrani intellectual, smart, scared, saying one thing, thinking another, smiling a third. We became friends. He taught me subtleties that wouldn't be in any briefing. How to talk to a market vendor without seeming like an outsider. Where to buy good pistachios. How to properly complain about life so you'd be considered one of them. Not a suspicious optimist. Communication with Tel Aviv, once a week, through a system I won't describe. I'll just say this. No meetings, no couriers, no items that could be found during a search. Information flowed one way, from me. Only confirmation codes came back, and rarely, very rarely, short instructions. Mossad is not a talkative organization. They say exactly as much as is needed. Sometimes it's annoying. You're sitting in Tehran with the feeling that you're working into a void, and the only response you get is something like, acknowledged. Acknowledged. Great. I'm risking my neck and you say, acknowledged. But then you realize, it's right. The less you know, the less you can tell. A year later, entry into the Ministry of Defense. It didn't happen by itself. I cultivated it like a garden, slowly, carefully, through acquaintances, through recommendations, through a chain built over months. First, an engineer analyst in the technical department. A most boring position from which you wouldn't steal state secrets, let alone the production plan of a bolt factory. But it was an entry. And the rest? Patience. Patience is an illegal agent's main skill. More important than language, more important than memory, more important than the ability to lie. The ability to wait when everything in you screams, do it already. First day at the ministry. Security at the entrance. Serious men with the faces of people forbidden to smile since birth. Metal detector, documents. A photo ID where I looked like someone woken up at 5 in the morning. The department, about 20 techies, each with their own obsession. One colleague, Reza, about 35, a programmer, talked about football with the same passion normal people talk about their children. On the very first day, he asked, "Who do you root for?" I said, "Persepolis." A Tehran team. Most people support them. The correct answer. Reza bloomed like a desert flower. "Brother." That's it. Contact established. Sometimes intelligence is just knowing who to root for in football. A year went by to become one of them. Not a diligent bore who does everything correctly, but truly one of them. Ordinary. A somewhat predictable techie who can be trusted because he's boring. It's a distinct art, to be boring when you're not boring by nature. By nature, I notice everything and react quickly. I had to learn to react slowly, to appear a little dumber than I was, sometimes not to get a joke on the first try. The hardest part of this job isn't language or memory. The hardest part is pretending every day to be a less intelligent person than you are. It's humiliating. It's necessary. 2016. Transfer to another department. Greater access. Different documents. Different meetings. This didn't happen by itself. I arranged it through Reza, who had become a department head. I helped him with a technical task his team couldn't solve for 3 months. I solved it in a week. Pure engineering. Nothing secret. But Reza remembered. People always remember who helped them when they looked like idiots in front of management. It's a universal law. It works in Tel Aviv. It works in Tehran. It works everywhere. There are people and ego. New department, and that's where the real work began. The documents that passed through me weren't boring reports about bolts, logistics, coordination with sites, budget figures that didn't match public data, like the sky doesn't match the asphalt. I didn't copy anything, didn't photograph. That's amateurism from Hollywood movies that ends in Evan prison. I memorized a page of text after one reading. That's not bragging. It's the result of 2 years of training that turned my head into a hard drive with an inhuman capacity. In the evening at home, I wrote it down. Cipher, system, transmission. Tel Aviv received pieces and assembled its own picture, which they didn't show me. Physicists, that's a separate story. The Iranian nuclear program isn't one bunker with a sign saying bomb here. It's a network of facilities, a network of people, a network of budgets scattered across the country like puzzle pieces that no one person holds entirely. I began to collect it bit by bit. Names in documents, travel itineraries, lines and estimates about special equipment for facilities with innocent names. But ordinary warehouses don't consume as much electricity as a small city. One physicist, I'll call him Dr. X, appeared everywhere. Signature on different projects, different cities, different times. I started assembling his roots like a detective on a stakeout. Only a detective can lose a suspect and get upset. I had no right to lose him. 6 months later, I had his travel schedule, the names of 2 facilities he oversaw, and data on one underground complex in the central part of the country. The underground complex. That was the main thing. The data was indirect but convincing. Cement deliveries in volumes for construction, not repair. Energy consumption like a small factory. Security requiring resources disproportionate to the facility's official purpose. In pieces, in numbers, by logic that forms a single picture if you know how to look. Tel Aviv was assembling. I was collecting. And then there was the day. My shirt literally got soaked with sweat on my back right in the ministry corridor. 2018. A scheduled inspection. Every 2 years, security comes, asks questions, observes reactions, leaves. I had been through it twice. Normal, no nerves, clear sailing. The third time, a different person came. Not the fat, good-natured colonel who usually conducted inspections and was more interested in his own schedule than your answers. This one was young, about 35, with glasses, spoke softly, and watched intently like a cat before a mouse hole. That's a bad sign. The loud and aggressive ones, they just pressure you. The quiet, clever ones, they think. And a thinking interrogator is a completely different story. He asked about a business trip to Isfahan. 3 months ago, official trip, everything documented, everything clean. I answered calmly, looked him in the eye, gave details first without waiting for questions. That's the right tactic. Innocent people speak readily. He nodded, wrote, then without transition, like a nail in a soft spot. Do you know Amir Sadeghi? Amir Sadeghi, a man I'd seen once by chance in a cafe in Isfahan. We hadn't even spoken. We just happened to be at neighboring tables, nodded like strangers. Not an agent, not a contact, just a person. I said evenly, no, I don't know him. The interrogator looked, nodded, wrote. Okay, that's all. Stood up, left. I made it to the restroom, closed the door, looked at myself in the mirror. Normal face, calm, nothing out of place. But my back was as wet as after a swimming pool. Where he got the name of a man from a cafe in Isfahan? I don't know. Surveillance? Coincidence? A test of my reaction? It didn't matter. Only one thing mattered. They were watching. More closely than before. That evening, a signal to Tel Aviv. A warning. The reply, continue work. Be careful. Be careful. Well, thanks. Very specific. Very helpful. The following months were silent. A sticky, unpleasant silence like before a storm when birds fall quiet. No checks, everything routine. Reza telling football stories. But something had changed. Not a fact, not evidence. Just a feeling you can't explain logically but which you trust because 7 years in this job teach you to trust feelings more than papers. One security officer, used to nod in the corridor, now looked for a second longer. Just once. But I noticed. And I started changing my routes home. A different one every day. Basic, but more carefully than before. Spring 2019. That same underground complex, information came about a major equipment delivery. Tel Aviv wanted precise coordinates. I had a general area, not a pinpoint. 3 weeks of work through logistics, through the supplier chain, through documents that passed through my hands. I found it. The coordinates were sent. And then, an unexpected turn that saved my life. I was included in the list of participants for a scheduled meeting about this facility. A routine, working meeting at the ministry. I was supposed to be there. Tel Aviv knew this. The day before the meeting, a signal came. 3 words. Don't go there. I called Reza. I said, listen, I've got a stomach bug. Must have eaten something bad. Reza, a good soul, never digging deeper than necessary, said, oh well, rest up. Get better, brother. I stayed home. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my imaginary stomach and why Tel Aviv told me not to come. The next day, Reza spoke in whispers and looked around like my old landlord. Only the landlord feared the government abstractly, while Reza feared something specific and right now. Did you hear? He said. I said, what? He leaned closer. The facility. That one. Overnight. I chewed my sandwich. What about the facility? Reza looked at me like an idiot. They hit it. A strike. Everything. And fell silent. Because someone from security walked past. That's when something cold ran through me. From the back of my head to my heels. Not fear. Understanding. Mossad had received the coordinates I transmitted. And used them. Quickly. I had transmitted them 3 days ago. That meant the facility was important. That meant the strike was precise. That meant someone very smart in Iranian counterintelligence was already sitting there calculating who knew the coordinates, who had access, who was supposed to be at that meeting, but didn't come. The math was simple. The answer to that math was me. I finished my sandwich, because not finishing it would have been suspicious. The summons to the big boss happened 2 days later. Not to Reza, but higher up. A person I had seen 3 or 4 times in 5 years. A large office, a leather chair, a face like a stone mask that never truly smiled. He spoke evenly, without emotion, like an announcer reading a verdict on that very television channel that shows executions between commercial breaks. Why didn't you come to the meeting? I said, I was sick, stomach. I informed Reza. He nodded, looked, long, uncomfortably long, the way they look when they already know the answer and are checking if yours matches. Then, an interesting coincidence. The facility discussed at that meeting was destroyed. Overnight. And you weren't there. A pause like a chasm between 2 shores. How do you feel? I said. Better, thank you. He smiled, coldly, like a refrigerator smiles. Good. Go back to work. I left, walked to my desk, sat down, opened my computer. One thought spun in my head like a scratched record with a broken needle. They didn't arrest me, meaning they weren't sure. But interesting coincidence from a smart person's lips isn't casual conversation. It's a warning. It's, we're watching. I was on the list. Not number 1. Otherwise the conversation would have been in a basement, not an office. But definitely on the list. And that list would narrow. That evening, a detailed signal to Tel Aviv. For the first time in 7 years, I received a detailed response. Not a code, not acknowledged. 3 words in Hebrew that meant, prepare for extraction. Right now. Not in a month. Not when it's convenient. Now. What followed were 2 weeks that aged me 10 years. Not figuratively. I later looked at photos taken before and after. My face was genuinely different, older, more watchful, as if someone had cranked the sharpness to maximum and left it there forever. Outwardly, everything was as usual. Work, colleagues, Reza, and his eternal Persepolis who was losing again, and that was the only normal topic in my life those days. The old landlord complained about neighbors, about the government, about the quality of tomatoes at the market, about everything within the radius of his dissatisfaction. I drank tea with him, nodded, laughed in the right places. Outside, an ordinary person, a little tired, a little distracted. Inside, a taut string that vibrated with every movement of air. Every sound in the ministry corridor, my head turned slightly before I could stop it. Every unfamiliar car near the house, the license plate memorized automatically, like breathing. Every phone call from an unknown number, a second before answering when the entire scenario already played out in my head. If it's them, the first word is this, the second is that, then like this. It wasn't paranoia. It was a reflex developed over years, and in those 2 weeks, it worked at such a frequency that I could physically hear it, like a high-pitched ringing in my ears that wouldn't stop. Once, 2 a.m, a knock at the door. I was lying down, not sleeping. In those 2 weeks, I barely slept at all, dozing in snatches like a cat that watches with one eye even in sleep. The knock. I got up, went to the door, stood for 30 seconds. They were longer than some years, I'm absolutely sure of it. Time works differently when you're standing at a door and don't know what's behind it. I opened it. My downstairs neighbor, an elderly, agitated man in pajamas. A pipe had burst. Water was flowing. Help. I helped turn off the pipe. We then stood in his hallway. He thanked me, offered tea. I said no need. It's fine. Good night. I went back to my place. Lay down. Stared at the ceiling until dawn, thinking about the pipe and how life sometimes plays very stupid jokes at very inconvenient times. At work, the quiet surveillance became more palpable. Not crude, not clumsy. Professional, almost imperceptible. Almost. One security officer started appearing in the cafeteria exactly when I was there. I had never seen him there once in 5 years before. Maybe a coincidence. In my profession, there are no coincidences. There are coincidences you notice and coincidences that bury you. I noticed, and I continued to eat my soup with the air of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide and who just really loved soup. Reza once asked, we were smoking outside. He was the only one in the department who smoked. I kept him company, though I don't smoke. Just an excuse to go out and talk without extra ears. He said, "Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept." I said, "Yeah, can't sleep. Maybe the weather." He nodded. "I also sleep badly when Persepolis loses." He looked at me, then said more quietly, "Be careful out there." And that was it. He didn't explain what out there meant. Just, be careful. Reza wasn't stupid. He sensed something was wrong. Didn't know what exactly, but he felt it. A good man with good instincts in a bad system. There are many such people in Iran. Smart, decent people who live inside a machine they didn't choose and cannot stop. The signal came on the 12th day. Date, time, place. Briefly, Mossad doesn't write novels. Tomorrow. I burned everything that could be burned. Not much. There was almost nothing. I kept nothing physical for precisely this reason. I walked through the apartment, looked at it as you look at a place you're leaving forever. Not with sentimentality, but with a professional eye. What here will tell them about me if they come tomorrow? Nothing. An ordinary apartment of an ordinary official. Books in Farsi, dishes, clothes, a few photos with legendary relatives who don't exist. All clean. I went to bed at 11. I fell asleep. For the first time in 12 days, normally, deeply, without the ringing in my ears. It's strange how the brain works. Until you know when, The body doesn't relax. When you know, it lets go, because uncertainty is scarier than certainty. Always. Morning. A normal morning. Shower, tea, got dressed, went out, greeted the landlord. He was by the elevator with a bag, going to the market for tomatoes, complaining about the neighbor who had been parking his car incorrectly for 3 years and no one did anything. I listened, nodded, smiled. The old, grumpy, fat man with walrus mustaches for whom I was genuinely grateful for 2 years of normal conversations. He didn't know why. I didn't explain. I got to work. 2 hours at the computer, normal work, normal documents, normal morning. Reza brought coffee, placed it nearby silently. He sometimes did that, without words, just placed it. I said thank you. He nodded and went to his desk. Then I got up, went to him. I said, "Listen, stomach again. Sorry." Reza looked at me. Looked for a long time, longer than usual, with the expression of someone who wants to say something and doesn't. Then, "Do you even eat properly?" I said, "I try to." He waved his hand. "Go home, brother. Get well. Hey." Pause. "And generally, take care of yourself." The last part, quietly, almost to himself. I stared at the back of his head for about 5 seconds. A normal guy. Honest. Loves football and his kids and bad coffee from the ministry cafeteria. Found himself in the wrong country at the wrong time, or in the right country at the right time, just on the other side of me. Then I left. Passed through security, metal detector, nod, everything as always. Went out onto the street. Tehran, traffic jams, honking, smog, heat. I turned right and walked. Not home. What happened next were 2 hours I won't describe in detail. Not a dramatic escape through mountains with a shootout and a beautiful sunset. A boring, cold procedure designed by smart people for exactly such cases. Several points, several handoffs, several documents, several faces I saw for the first time, and who looked at me like a package, received, delivered, forgotten. Professionals. A border isn't a door you open and walk through smiling. It's several hours when you realize that the system you lived in for 7 years is behind you, and ahead is another system where you're also not quite at home. Between two systems, you yourself, alone, with a fake name in your pocket and your own name in your head. Ben Gurion Airport, arrival hall, people with signs, families meeting families, children screaming with joy, some crying, some laughing. An ordinary airport, in an ordinary living world where people arrive and depart, and no one thinks it's a privilege. I stood for about 30 seconds and just watched it all. Just watched. The man in the plaid shirt appeared on the right, the same accountant who had offered me coffee 7 years ago and seemed so inconspicuous I wanted to rub my eyes. Now he seemed like the most familiar person on the planet. He looked at me, said quietly, "How are you?" I thought for a second. Said, "Stomach bug." He looked at me. A second, 2. Then he laughed. Quietly, briefly, genuinely. Not politely, but truly amused. He said, "Let's go. Get some real food." 3 days later, a small notice in Iranian news. Dry, official, 3 lines. A ministry employee detained on suspicion of espionage for a foreign state. The name, not mine. Another person. A colleague from an adjacent department whom I had seen maybe 3 times. Thin, always in a hurry, always with a folder under his arm. They took him. Why him and not me? I don't know. Maybe he was also on the list and just happened to be more convenient. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe Iranian counterintelligence decided it was better to take someone than no one. In such systems it works exactly like that. It's more important to show results than to find the right person. I think about that man with the folder. Not often, but I think about him. Reza is probably still watching Persepolis and regretting that good techies get stomach bugs at the most inconvenient times. The old landlord decided I left suddenly. It happens. People leave. Life is unpredictable. The tomatoes at the market are still bad. Dr. X, the physicist from the documents, is working wherever he's working or not working. I don't know, and don't ask. The facility with the coordinates I transmitted, it's no longer there. That much I know for sure. It's the only thing I know for sure from this whole story. I live in Israel. A different name, a different life. A job without underground facilities and interrogators with soft voices and the gaze of a cat at a mouse hole. Sometimes I dream of Tehran. Traffic jams, honking, the smell of cardamom in cafes. The old man who looks over his own shadow and complains about tomatoes. A beautiful city. Angry, scared, beautiful. Those 3 words about it don't contradict each other in the slightest. My therapist says I miss the extreme, and it's unhealthy, and we need to work through it. I say, maybe, and look out the window. He writes something in his notepad. I think in Farsi. Some things just don't turn off. Accepted. We live on.